Alrighty then, a summary of Fascism and Social Revolution by R. Paul Dutt. So often fascism within liberal circles is portrayed as a fight between liberal parliamentary democracy and outright dictatorship. However, what R. Paul Dutt so expertly expresses within this book is in fact fascism is the logical conclusion of finance monopoly capitalism. That is, capitalism and its liberal parliamentary forms into dictatorship in order to save itself. There are two great allies of what causes fascism to rise within liberal parliamentary democracies and late-stage finance monopoly capitalism, and that is the contradictions inherent within capitalism and social democracy, which I believe is a social democracy symbol. The first great contradiction inherent within capitalism is the productive forces and the relations of production. The productive forces are the level of technological advancement a society has. Are we a Bronze Age slave society? Are we a hunter-gatherer, primitive communist society? So like we're hunter-gathering and we have no classes and we're living equally with each other in nature. Or are we an industrialized and capitalist society? So that's productive forces, the level of technology we have. Relations of production is how this technology is distributed, how it is ran, how humans are in relation to one another, who is on top, who is on bottom. And under capitalism, that is the capitalists, and at the bottom are the workers. Capitalism then is in a state of constant crisis. We currently produce more than enough in our industrial age to give more, to feed, house, clothe, and have a good quality of life for the vast majority of humanity. And when R. Paul Dutt was writing this book in the 1930s, we even were producing more than enough goods to feed twice as many people on Earth back then. Imagine the level of technological advancement we've had since then. We have more than enough houses to house everybody. We have more than enough food and kilocalories to feed everybody thanks to these big industrial machines of capitalism. I mean, it truly is amazing, the productive forces of industrialized capitalism. However, because these are all owned by such a tiny minority of society, the vast majority of people starve, the vast majority of food rots, the vast majority of these houses sit empty. And when shit hits the fan, when economic depressions happen, they in fact start destroying the technology in order to keep their profits, in order to keep their prices high. Factories start rotting away. We especially saw this during Great Depressions. In 2008, a lot of houses just sat rotting away into nothingness. A lot of factories saw it empty. And that wasn't because there wasn't enough workers. That wasn't because there weren't enough people who wanted to work. That was because all these factories were owned by a tiny minority of humanity and they were using them for their own selfish interests and not our interests, the 99% of humanity. Secondly, inherent within capitalism is a reserve army of labor. There must always be a section of the working class who is made to be unemployed, who is made to be homeless, who is made to be at the edges of society so that the workers have a lot less negotiating power. If somebody is always willing to accept work at worse pay than these guys, it's a lot harder for them to negotiate. And so fascism becomes a very easy way to get these broken factories, these factories that are sitting around not doing anything, and this reserve army of labor, this section of the working class that is not working. It becomes a very easy way to kill two birds with one stone. You can start making these factories work again through endless war, through seizing them for, of course, the capitalist class. And in fact, to illustrate how much within capitalism fascism operate, R. Paul Dutt mentioned that within the glassblowers industry, the Germans in fact deindustrialized the glassblowers industries so that they could artificially hire more workers. And that's because under capitalism, an increase in technology, because it is owned, and productivity, because it is owned by small capitalist class, in fact means more of us are laid off. In fact, means we have to work longer hours. An increase in technology does not mean better lives for ourselves, more time off of work for ourselves. That would only happen if the working class overthrew the bourgeois. And so they actually got rid of the glass-blowing technologies to force more workers into work, instead of using that new productive glass-blowing technology to make sure that people didn't have to work as many hours and were taken care of. So the big contradiction is these factories that are sitting around and these ton of people who aren't working. What's a great way to kill off all the people who aren't working and to start utilizing these factories? Endless war. And so fascism starts resorting to endless war. Finally, of course, is the contradictions of the imperialist stage of capitalism. Capitalism divides up the world into spheres of influence, extracts resources from them, and these imperialist markets become dwindling and dwindling over time. And so fascism comes as an easy way to quickly redistribute them through force, to extort as much money as you can out of them through tariff and trade deals and new conquests. And for more on imperialism, you can check out this series. I have a playlist. I did a video on imperialism. The second main thing that helps out fascism is social democracy. Social democrats were revisionist communists, socialists that believed that we could vote in communism, that we could vote in socialism peacefully through the system, that somehow we could overcome class contradiction and create an equal society through the parliamentary systems of European democracy. Social democrats then were always intermediaries between the bourgeois and the working class, saying that the working class had to put down its fight in order to conciliate with the bourgeois. And this would lead to them within Italy and Germany. When Italy and Germany had chances to go communist, when the workers of Italy and Germany were ready to seize power, when the workers of Italy and Germany were ready to seize power and start communist revolutions, for them to call off the revolutions, for them to refuse to seek power, for them to call off the general strikes, for them to tell the workers, let's just make a quick deal with the bourgeois. And with these workers' movements neutered by reformist policy, sabotaged by the social democrats, who would refuse violent revolution, which is the only way to change social classes, fascism would be able to be born. Out of the failures of the working class movements, the bourgeois would be able to play off of social democrats and then funnel all of their support into the fascists. Using the social democrats as a temporary way to blow off the workers' movement while they rallied all of their forces for the growing fascist movement for the final and destructive blow against the workers' movement. Social democrats then acted as a temporary distraction while the bourgeois fomented fascist movements to direct the final striking blow against workers' movement. Social democrats would also try a doomed lesser evilism strategy, saying that if we voted in lesser evil liberals, we would somehow be able to avert fascism. However, all of the lesser evil liberals like von Hindenburg, von Papen, that the social democrats backed within Germany and Italy ended up peacefully appointing fascists to power. There was no fascist revolution. The rich, the bourgeois, the liberal parties that the Social Democrats told everybody were the lesser evils, that we could somehow avoid fascism, were the ones who put fascists into power peacefully every single time. In fact, we're the ones who were funding the fascists beforehand. Before Mussolini's march on Rome, he met with the top military generals and parliamentarians of Italy, and he came to power without any violence. The rich put him right into power because they were afraid of the workers' movement that had been temporarily stopped by Social Democrats. Same thing in Germany. The H-man was peacefully elected by von Hindenburg in order to crush the workers' movement that was growing, that had been stopped by the Social Democrats. What is fascism then? Fascism is finance monopoly capital and class society trying to save itself in the most brutal form. It is the dictatorship of the bourgeois attempting one final save phase, throwing off parliamentary democracy as an illusion, and trying to force social change from not happening through a brutal dictatorship. It is trying to contain all the contradictions of capitalism. The relations between productive forces and relations of production, the reserve army of labor, imperialism and its dwindling market, overproduction, trying to contain all of these contradictions from exploding into revolution through force. It is the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, the dictatorship of the rich, no longer pretending that it cares, no longer pretending that it's a democracy, because it no longer has the resources to be able to do so. And in fact, the elements of fascism were contained within liberal democracy and imperialist finance monopoly capitalism itself. It is just them being expressed in their utmost extreme forms. That is why R. Palm Dutt, in fact, calls a lot of liberal parliamentary countries pre-fascist. There is nothing wholly original about fascism. It takes socialist language and populism, and it takes the economics of state monopoly capitalism in order to give a farce to the workers that it actually cares about them while continuing capitalism. And in attempting to save capitalism, it brings class warfare to its most brutal standpoint. In Italy, wages fell to their utmost levels under Mussolini. In Italy, industrial production in fact fell and output fell, and yet social order was maintained through the utmost brute force to keep this final strangling hold of the market, this final looting of the working class by the bourgeois from exploding into revolution. It was shock therapy under dictatorship, privatizations, the ending of unions, except those controlled by the party and the rich, and in fact an early version of Fukuyama's idea that we were at the end of history, that humanity could no longer evolve from here, and that this was the best we will ever get. Capitalism in decay.